Hi, it's Mark Owen from Moose Market PR, the editor of Punchline magazine, and welcome to Punchline Talks, a big interview. Today I'm joined by Joshua Taee. He's the managing director of Huffkins Bakery and Tea Rooms. They're one of Gloucestershire's oldest family businesses. They've been going for 130 years, based in Burford in 1890. Welcome to Punchline Talks, Joshua.
Hello, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Well, fantastic news. You guys have just bought another bakery or tea room in Morton and Marsh. That's a bit crazy. I mean, the world's gone a bit mad. Expanding, great news.
Yeah, growing into the headwinds, which is slightly counterintuitive and probably from the outside looks a little bit mad, as you say. But it's a great business. We have just for context, we have 8 cafe tea rooms, all in the UK. As you correctly said, we were headquartered in Oxfordshire. We have several in Gloucestershire as well, but we also have a few in London. So a little bit of a geography, a little bit of a spread. But Morton's an ideal town for us. It's right in the middle of our Cotswold triangle, and the site we've taken on traded as Charlotte's Pantry for the last 8 years or so. Owner operated, a wonderful couple, Chris and Sue Peel, who felt ready for retirement. So it's quite a nice story in that we've got an exiting family and an incoming family, but both families are local, and so the business is going to stay in local Cotswold hands, which we think is a bit of a triumph, and it's great to be part of a hospitality business that's actually doing something and going forward, despite the last couple of years, which have been dreadful. And I suppose the storm that we're in or coming into, with the cost of living crisis and the inflation that we're seeing, and the other pressures.
If we could just go back a little bit. So how many people are employed by Huffkins, and what's the sort of turnover of the company?
So at the last count, we employ just over 125 people. That fluctuates seasonally because we tend to take on our students actually come to us mostly in the summer and then again at Christmas. So we're at a slightly lower ebb at the minute. It will probably ebb up again into Christmas peak. And we turn over in the region of £6 million per year at the moment.
And where are the actual cafes? And obviously, I know the great one in Cheltenham. I've been there lots and lots of times. You've got the one in Morton and Marsh now. Where are the rest?
Good knowledge. You might have missed the other one in Cheltenham. There are 2 in Cheltenham.
John Lewis, is it?
That's it. So 2 in Cheltenham, one on the Prom, one in John Lewis. Very different, both lovely. We have Stow on the Wold, which is also a Gloucestershire market town. And then just thinking of the geography here, if you travel east out of Cheltenham, the next one you'd hit is Burford, which is the flagship and the original. Some would say the best, but everyone has their own opinion.
Do they say that? Do they say the best in Burford? I could probably do.
Well, there's nice history there. We have, in fact, it happened to me recently. A lady must have been in her mid-90s, and she sat down for a cup of tea. And I always try and have a chat with people in the tea room, especially when it's quieter. It was quiet that morning. I just said good morning. And we got to talking, and she explained she was one of Mrs. Gray's girls. Mrs. Gray ran Huffkins for several decades, including through the Second World War, and took on actually a lot of evacuees, young children from London predominantly, but also from Birmingham, big cities that were obviously being hit during the war. And Mrs. Gray ran the Bakery Hotel in Burford, as well as the bakery and the tea rooms. So she ran it as a sort of finishing school, and so we have this little legion of now really quite elderly, predominantly women, who in their younger years had really, I suppose, gone to finishing school at Huffkins, really, when it was under the steer of Mrs. Gray, and they called themselves Mrs. Gray's girls. So Burford has all that lovely, rich history attached to it, which you don't find in say John Lewis in Cheltenham, but it's the history of the brand, so it sort of follows us around, I guess. But a lot of people have lovely memories of Burford, given it's been there for such a long time. But continuing the tour along the A40, if you passed Burford, you'd then hit Witney. Witney, we have a tea room on the high street. We also have our craft bakery there in the town on a light industrial estate called Parkside, which is up by the Lees, if you know the Lees, at the top of Witney High Street, past the Buttercross. And then travelling north, you would go all the way up to Stratford-on-Avon, and that would complete the Cotswold tour, so to speak. I suppose you could argue the toss as to whether Stratford's technically Cotswolds, probably the same with Cheltenham, they're on the edges, but that triangle around the North Cotswolds, you'd then have to hop on a train and head down to sunny Kingston-on-Thames, where you'd find us on the first floor of John Lewis there, right in the middle of town, in a beautiful 25, 30-foot high glass atrium, which is really stunning. And then you'd hop, I suppose, on the overground and then onto the tube to Oxford Street and find us again in John Lewis, Oxford Street, at the flagship. And that's the 8. Morton in Marsh will be the 9th when it opens, funnily enough, on the 9th of November, assuming all goes to plan with the shop fit, which is still on.
The good news is I think I've been to about 5 of those. And I'm a big scone lover. I'll ask you which one you normally call it, by the way. They're very different though, aren't they?
Yeah.
I know it's from locations. The one in Cheltenham is a lot smaller. The one in Stowe in the Wold, I've delivered my magazines there and sat outside having a lovely cup of coffee. What kind of amount of covers do you? How many people do you serve a day? Have you got rough figures for that?
Yeah, it varies. Because we're quite I suppose a light food offering. We're a cafe tea room, not a full service restaurant. Most people don't sit down for 3 courses with us, so they tend to be slightly more casual, relaxed sittings, and we very much have a philosophy of whatever you want, whenever you want it, within reason. So if you just want a coffee and a toasted tea cake from the bakery, that's absolutely fine. That's lovely. Same for coffee and cake and all that good stuff. But equally, you can have a cooked breakfast or a 3-tier afternoon tea. So there's quite a variety. But most of the stays are probably under an hour. So we can turn our tables reasonably quickly. Very casual, very relaxed service. The smallest site we have is Cheltenham Prom, and indoors, I think we are probably no more than 30 seats.
It's very small then.
A beautiful big promenade in front of us, and we have probably another 25 or 30 seats out front there. So, in the summer and even coming into autumn when people will still sit outside comfortably, we're probably at around 50 to 60 covers, as we call them in the trade, seats. Our biggest store by comparison would probably be Kingston-on-Thames in the John Lewis space there, which is pretty cavernous. And from memory, we have about 130 seats there. The rest of the tea rooms all fall somewhere within that.
How did you get into John Lewis? I mean, that you must have, when the phone call came, you must be pretty excited about that, or was it like, gosh?
It was a really odd event actually. I remember being in the head office, and my commercial manager, Natasha, who looks after all of our retail ranging and does all our merchandising and our forecasting and planning, looks after a lot of our suppliers and does a lot of work on the website. She came running in and she said, I've got a lady from John Lewis on the phone. They want to talk about third-party catering. And we have always, we've always done platters, and we have a lot of offices and the like that order platters from us, and big trays of sandwiches and scones and cakes, the sort of stuff you could take to a birthday party or a meeting or a wake, whatever the event is. And so I said, well, that's fine. Go and take an order. I'm sure they just want some third party catering in the form of sandwiches. And she came back white as a sheet and said, they don't want sandwiches, they want to talk to you. So I picked up the phone thinking they might want some special fillings or something. And as it turned out, they were in the throes of organising the opening in Cheltenham of their new department store there, and they'd done a lot of research. They'd been out on the ground. They'd been to various other businesses, and what they were looking for is a catering hospitality business to come in and take a piece of real estate within the department store and really partner up with them. And they viewed Huffkins as the perfect partner. I suppose we were big enough to look competent, which we're always keen to do if we can, and capable of obviously running across a few different locations and whatnot. But we're by no means a national chain. We're not a Costa or a Starbucks, and we're not generic in that way. And I suppose we're local as well. And those were really the things that they seemed to love about Huffkins. The fact that we have our own bakery and we have that provenance, the history, the differentiation of our products, given that we make them ourselves. So we went down the rabbit hole, and we popped up a few months later with a brand new tea room inside a John Lewis department store, which is somewhere Huffkins has never been. We're used to trading inside these beautiful old biscuity, Cotswold, crumbly stone buildings. So to turn up in a pristine ceramic tiled, LED lit, high tech, almost airport type environment, it's a very different space to try and create the Huffkins experience in, and that was a real challenge, and one that we've really enjoyed. And it wasn't long after that it was clearly a success, and we were invited to go into Kingston and then into the flagship at Oxford Street as well. So we really just rode the wave, to be honest with you, Mark. We didn't do anything spectacular or particularly talented. We just had our heads down doing our own thing, to be truthful, and we were invited.
What was the biggest lesson you learned from
that? I think with my business hat on, it's that lovely thing of you never know what's around the next corner, and sometimes just turning up and being in the game is enough. When those waves come along, ride them. It's that business is always surprising me. You never quite know what's going to pop up next in terms of opportunities. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and the other big opportunity that a lot of people don't realise is that you're in Japan. Do you want to explain about that, please? Because there's a number of different pop-up stores that you have over there. I often how do you get cakes from the Cotswolds over to Japan? How did that come about?
Yeah, it's a funny sort of quirk of the company, and again, it makes us sound as though we must be some gigantic multinational, and we're really not. We're just a family business, but we've always been headquartered in Burford, as I said, and that's really in the heart of the Cotswolds. The Cotswolds has a long and really interesting history, and you'll probably know it started with the wool trade, and centuries ago, the Cotswolds was exporting sheep's wool all over the world. And it was the economic powerhouse of the UK, really, at one time. It still has that, I think, in its DNA. There are a lot of entrepreneurial family and small businesses based in the Cotswolds, but increasingly it's become a tourist hotspot. And Americans are one of our biggest visitor groups, and the Japanese are probably equally, if not more prevalent, I suppose, in terms of tourist numbers. I'm talking pre-COVID really here. I think we're still in recovery at the moment. Things aren't quite back in balance, but we've always been really well visited by our Japanese friends, and in particular they have a real passion for the Huffkins brand, and I think Japanese people are actually very brand loyal, very interested in brand. So over the years, we noticed, more and more tour groups and coaches and small VIP groups turning up with Japanese visitors, really making specific trips to Huffkins. And over the years, that piqued our interest. So we took a exhibition stand one year. I think it was about 2017, I want to say from memory. We took an exhibition stand in Tokyo at one of the major international food shows, and we met up with a lovely gentleman called Makoto, who operates a business in Japan called Charmond Gourmand, which is a food business, and he basically partners up. I think he has 6 stable brands from Europe. We're the only one from the UK. There are some very beautiful biscuit and chocolate makers from Belgium, France. I think there's a fudge maker from Switzerland in his stable as well. And he really curates those brands really closely and works with us to bring the brand to Japan. So we export product via Charmond Gourmand, and they sell that on in Japan. But we also work on a licensed basis. So we've shared various of our special recipes, and those are produced by 3 different partner bakeries out in Japan. We control that very closely. We've sent our bakery management team over several times to go and do training and quality control with them. And we organize a series of pop-up tea rooms, mainly in large department stores. Japan has the most incredible department store culture, I suppose, and the food floors in Japanese department stores are unlike anything you've ever seen. I say that having supplied Fortnum & Mason for 6 years. I know my way around a food hall. But Japan is something else altogether. The variety, the quality, they really treat their food halls like a mecca. So we pop up in these places, and we run pop-up tea rooms in partnership with our friends at Charmond Gourmand. It's great having an in-country partner because they know the culture, they have the local contacts, they can get access to staff locally. There's obviously a language barrier for us, so it's a real partnership in that sense. We have the brand, we have the baking know-how, and we have the appetite to go and make something of Huffkins in Japan. But without our partners, we'd be at a loss, frankly, as to how to start. So it's a great partnership. It's a blend of export and licensing, and it's great. It really plays to what Japanese people want.
I just think it's another part of your success story. It's absolutely amazing. When I read about that, heard about it a couple of years ago, we've obviously followed the story for quite some time. How much is that worth to you, if you don't mind me asking? To the company, kind of turnover, not really profit, but
yeah, it's made. All our reporting is made really difficult, actually, by what's happened in the last few years. We've had 2 years of COVID, obviously, which has spun our high street numbers, but also all of our online sales and our exports, and everything's been spun wildly out of whack. And then trying to get any like for likes is obviously a complete disaster as well. So we end up looking back to 2019 still to sort of get a gauge on how well or how badly we're doing at any one point in time. The Japanese market has been very slow to come out of COVID, in truth. I think there's a cultural piece there. They're very, very cautious, and they manage COVID slightly differently to the way it was managed here. I know it's only recently opened up for inbound tourism to Japan, and that's still very strictly controlled. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, outbound tourism isn't recovered from Japan either. So it's not been trading particularly strongly in the last year, but we are at several hundreds of thousands of pounds of revenue out in Japan, certainly pre-COVID, and we should be back up at that sort of level, coming up towards 500,000 of revenue, hopefully in the next calendar year. Fingers crossed, we'll get a good recovery in Japan, and that market will start to open up and operate a bit more normally.
What would be your sort of number one piece of advice if you had somebody else, wanted to export to Japan? What would you say to those? What would be the first thing you'd say? Hey, look out for this, look out for that. What would that be?
I think you need to get yourself partnered up with somebody who knows what they're talking about in country. Japan it's a fascinating place. I've really enjoyed visiting. It's very different to the UK in a lot of ways. So definitely local knowledge would be probably my number one piece, because without that, you're going to really, well, you're not going to struggle. You're just not going to get anywhere, frankly, unless you're a Japanese speaker and you have that knowledge yourself. I think the other thing that stood out to me hugely was the importance of brand in Japan. Japanese consumers are very aware of branding. They are very brand loyal. There also seems to be a premium placed on newness and novelty. So part of the reason we haven't set up a permanent fixed presence in Japan is that actually we've found an overwhelmingly good response when we pop up for a short period of time. It tends to be up to 2-3 weeks at a time in a location in partnership with an established department store brand, of which there are many, and then we disappear again for a period, and then we pop back up, and that way we don't become a part of the furniture, I suppose. We retain that authenticity and that excitement, that newness of, it is we are obviously a genuine British brand, but we have a real British band turning up here for a couple of weeks. They're going to bake on site. There's a pop-up tea room. It's as close as you can get to actually getting to the Cotswolds and coming to see us here as you possibly could, given that you're still in Japan. And when I say the response is overwhelming, I mean, I'm talking about airport-style queuing around 4 sides of the floor that we operate on, and then down stairwells to get back up. We have customers turning up with books and armchairs, fold-out armchairs, to queue up to 6 hours to come and visit Huffkins in Japan. So I'm not exaggerating when I say the demand is overwhelming when we go out there and we do a pop-up. It's incredibly energizing to see it, and it's
right. It must be absolutely amazing. What's the best sort of thing do they go for? Is it cucumber sandwiches and little tiers of cakes, or is it scones or scones? What's the most popular thing in Japan?
Well, we try and keep it authentic. So it does, we always base the menu around the classics. And for us, as a British bakery and tea room, that is inevitably afternoon tea type fare. So yes, sandwiches, scones and cakes. But that said, again, that Japanese appetite to try new is really important. So we tend to play around with different flavors. We've produced different flavors of scones. A lot of NPD, new product development work goes into that, recipe development. Lemon and elderflower featured last time. I think we did a cranberry and white chocolate scone. We've done date and walnut. We've played around with some really interesting flavors, yuzu, miso, and started trying to incorporate a few Japanese twists as well. And we take some suggestions from the partner bakeries occasionally too. And it's a bit of a balance, because you're trying to appeal to the local market, but equally you want to be authentic. So often we'll present a few different flavors alongside the standard fruit and plain. But a lot of the volume goes through the classics in truth, but it's great to also offer some more exciting versions. And some of that product development work then comes back home to roost in the Cotswolds. If we find actually that a lemon and elderflower scone works really well, we might unleash that as a special for a few weeks around Mother's Day, or put it into one of the online gift sets and sell it through huffkins.com for a short period as well. So there's a nice feedback loop with that sort of work.
Wow, yeah, I never really thought about it. I've never been at Huffkins.com. I'll have to have a good look. How did you get into the business? Are you a family member? Are you married into it, or?
I am a family member. So my parents purchased Huffkins as a one-off tea room in Burford with a tiny bakery in the back. I was 13 years old. I started working in the business at 13 years old. It was my job every half term, summer holiday, Christmas holiday, Easter holiday, weekends, you name it. I was in there, conscripted, mostly on the pot wash to start.
What year was that, Joshua?
Well, I'm 37 now, so your head maths might well be quicker than mine. Maths was never my forte, but it was
sort of 1990s, I suppose, something like that.
yeah, yeah. Well, they bought it in what 1998 or 1999, that kind of time. So it would have been just before the millennium, and I was 13, 14. I grew up.
Washing out pots and then move your way up, is it?
Well, yeah, it was everything was housed under one roof in that time. So we had the bakers in the back, we had kitchen just in front of that, pot wash and coffee just in front of that, and then all the way through the front of the building, the customer seating areas and the bakery shop, which was a big counter full of everything you'd expect to find. So I spent time in all those areas and learned to bake. Learned to sell bakers dozens of sticky buns on the counter. I'd wait on tables and did the whole thing for years. Spent 6 months working full time after school as well. Did a little bit of traveling after that and went to university. Qualified as a lawyer. Worked in London for coming on 6 years as actually an infrastructure lawyer, so working on big building projects, airports and railways, and then slightly fell out of love with that and came back to the business around 2012 full time, by which point my parents had opened another 2 stores. They'd opened Whitney and Stow-on-the-Wold. And I came back with my younger brother, who had been a barrister in London, who we'd both gone down that legal route. We're both, reasonably sort of bright and I suppose ambitious as well. We wanted to make our mark, I suppose, and it felt like a good time to come back into a family business. We'd never planned to do that. We'd very much struck out on our own in our own different ways, but the business felt like it needed input. Speaking to mum and dad, they were wrestling with 3 sites now, not one, but it also looked like there was a chance to do something, and we'd both grown up in the business and were very fond of it, knew it inside out. And sort of took that plunge together. It was a slightly reckless thing looking back on it, but I think we just caught the bug, the business bug, growing up in that sort of environment with those kind of parents. I don't think we appreciated how much that had rubbed off on us until we got half a decade into other careers and started to feel the itch.
Yeah, no, I think that's the thing about the hospitality trade, isn't it? There's sort of cut and thrust about it and the excitement of it. Maybe it's because every day there's a deadline, and every new cover there's a deadline, and it sort of keeps going, and there's always fresh ingredients, and I don't know, there's something in the excitement about it. I quite miss it still. If someone said to me, "Mark, would you like to be a chef for the day?" I'd probably just snap their hands off, but only for a day, mind you.
Yeah.
So how did you get on with your brother? Is you still in the business, your brother? Who is your brother? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. We're quite different. He's actually very good with numbers. I'm not the numbers man. So we've both been back for the best part of a decade now. Jacob's my younger brother, and he requalified as a chartered accountant. So you can choose whether you want to have a dull conversation about the law or about accountancy with him over dinner now. He's an expert. Takes great pains to remind me of that at every opportunity. But he's really matured into the financial area of the business. So he's our financial director, and actually, to his credit, does that incredibly capably. And we've relied on him developing his expertise there in the last few years through COVID, through all of the disruption and the challenge. He's actually really shouldered a huge amount of responsibility and has done, I think, a great job for us. I know I'm biased saying that, but
when did you take over the whole company?
I spent around 3 years when I first rejoined in I suppose it was really more of a sort of area manager type remit, working across the 3 sites. I did a lot of ugly sort of back end work. We had the old sharp till registers with the nasty little plastic covers over the buttons, taking cash only. So I introduced digital till systems that allowed us to track our sales and see what we were selling, get some data into the business. I helped to re-platform our accounting software, really dull stuff. We had receipts in shoeboxes still when I came back. We moved on to Sage first of all, and then we moved on to Xero, which is fully cloud-based and integrated with our till platform, so we don't have to do so much reconciliation. So I got into all those kind of grubby areas. I got back into the bakery and did a lot of product development work. I started to sound out some other opportunities in wholesale, lay some of the groundwork for wholesale accounts we opened with some bigger clients in later years. And it's really only been in the last 7 years that I have taken on the role of managing director, which has given me I suppose a bigger remit and obviously a position on the board as well.
Wow. Well, it's been quite a journey. So we're coming to the end of our chat, our only little journey here on Punchline Talks as well. I've got to ask you, what sort of music do you listen to in your car? What's your sort of favourite track, or the last, if you still buy CDs, what would that be?
Well, I'm pleased to say I don't still buy CDs. I remember having a 6 CD changer under the seat of my first car, which I thought was really snazzy.
I had one as well. It wasn't a Jag, was it? I had an X-type Jag, which I had six in there as well.
Yeah, it was. It was not a Jag.
Okay.
It's to be truthful, Mark, I tend to sing in the car, and the reason I sing in the car is I have a 1-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son, and if I drive with my daughter and there's no music in the car, she'll shout at me. So I'm an expert at singing Winnie the Pooh. And then we sing a selection of other nursery rhymes. If I ever get a quiet moment in the car, I tend to leave the radio off at the minute, just because it's a luxury to not have any noise whatsoever for a brief moment in the day.
It's funny when they get older, you end up doing the times tables, and I used to do places around the UK. My eldest daughter, who's now 32, she just couldn't remember the capital of England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. And I'm sure she was just winding me up. We did that for months as well. I've got to ask you, what's your top 3 business tips, please, Joshua?
Top 3, I would say, and this is fairly self-explanatory, but always act with integrity, I think, is crucial. I think of our suppliers and the ones we've worked with for the longest times. Our miller is a very good example. Our flour miller, Bertie and the team down at FWP Matthews. I remember when COVID first hit and the first lockdown was announced, the first phone call I got was from Bertie, who runs the Matthews mill. And it wasn't anything to do with their own business. He was simply calling to see if we were okay and to ask if we needed anything. And that's always stuck with me. He operates the business with absolute integrity. And I can say the same of many of our suppliers who've been with us for decades. And I think it's a really important piece. I try and keep it front of mind whenever I can, really. I think you've got to take risks. As a second one, I think sometimes you can't rationalize everything you do in business. You can't always make the numbers add up. I think you occasionally have to fly on instruments and listen to your gut, and that does involve sometimes taking risks. Try and mitigate your downsides. Don't be silly with your risks, but definitely put yourself out there. Going to Tokyo, was a risk for us. We spent probably £10,000-12,000 with no certainty of return to go and fly, accommodate ourselves, take an exhibition stand. It's paid off hugely, but it was a risk. And have fun. I mean, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, you're probably not going to put your best energy into it. So I think remembering to enjoy the journey and enjoy the process is really important, especially when you're working, in a smaller business. And it would be very easy for us to look at the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world and say, well, what are we doing? Why are we wasting our time, in a piddly £6 million business on the high street when people are flying rockets to space and doing all of these incredible things? But for me, it's about the process and the meaning as well. And we're a big part of our community. A lot of people rely on us for what we provide, and there's a legacy and a history behind what we're doing. So we try to see the enjoyment in that and the good in that as well, and it helps to keep us motivated on a day-to-day basis. And it can be a bit of a grind. So having a why and enjoying your way through, I think, is really important.
Joshua Taee, thanks ever so much for joining us today on Punchline Talks. Hopefully we'll see you again very soon. Thank you. Bye.